Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Living Power, your online Bible study where we are walking through the Bible in a year. It is great to see you today. We have a couple people that joined the class over the last couple of days, and I wanted to welcome you if this is your first video. It is wonderful to have you with us. I do hope and pray that you will learn a lot and enjoy the online Bible study. Specifically, one of the great things about this type of study is that it helps us become disciplined and get into the routine of personal daily worship, daily being the key. And that's what we're doing together, is we are coming together for a year and we're coveting to read the Bible together daily over the year. The videos are Monday to Friday, but we continue to read over the weekend. So thank you so much for your faithfulness. And it is quite an adventure, isn't it, when we read the Bible and it just becomes alive to us each and every day. Today we're going to look at 4 Psalms. I've entitled the lesson An Unconditional Covenant because we get into one of the Messianic Psalms today. The very last one that we're going to talk about today is Messianic, and it helps us to understand the Israelites, the Jewish interpretation of Messiah and what is to come. Things that haven't even happened yet in history. So we're going to learn a little bit more about their messianic understanding today. What I'd like to do is cover all of the Psalms. We had 4 that we're reading today, so I'm going to give you a little bit about each one. Psalm 144 and 145 talk about praise. The appropriateness of praise is how we could entitle those. And in 144, it tells us some things about God. God is the one who trains us, equips us, befriends us, and gives us authority and titles. There are some titles for God in this psalm too. Which do you love the most? Do you love where it says He is your loving ally, your fortress, your tower, your rescuer, or your shield? I know some of you are saying, oh, I like them all. Which is your favorite? Then for verse 15, we see a beatitude. Blessed, which simply means happy, are those who has Yahweh as their God. Didn't know that beatitude was in there, but I love that one, and that one is so true. Psalm 145, also a psalm about praise. 11 verse 8 to 20 kind of gives us some aspects about God, how merciful and compassionate He is. It talks about Him being slow to get angry, good to everyone, keeps His promises. He gives food and water to everything. I'm building a garden in the backyard. Would like to cultivate some summer vegetables. And it's kind of a partnership thing with the Lord as I walk in faith with Him and learn to trust Him even more. I would love to start to rely on Him for more and more things, and so we thought, well, maybe we'll just build a garden. And as in doing that, I'm becoming more sensitive to seeing things about nature. And we have a chipmunk that I didn't even know lived in the backyard, and we have a pair of turtle doves, which we've named Bonnie and Clyde. We have redbirds, bluebirds, titmouse, which aren't mice. I've come to learn that that's the name of a bird. And so we put a bird feeder out there, and we're just being sensitive to all these aspects of nature that it's just so easy to overlook. And I'm thinking, wow, that chipmunk is really kind of hefty. He must eat a lot of nuts. And then I'm thinking, well, where does he get all the nuts? And just kind of looking around and realizing we never fed all these animals. Who's been taking care of all the wild animals? We even have a family of deer in the backyard because there's a stream behind our fence in the backyard. Well, who takes care of all the animals? God does. God somehow provides food and water for all of His creation, and that's a reminder to us in this Psalm 145. I love it how it says, He is close to those who call on Him in truth. That's important in 145. It doesn't say He's close to everyone. He's close to those who call on Him in truth. He answers those, not all the prayers of everyone, but He answers those who fear Him. Fear just means giving Him reverence and respect. I think that, to me that means sometimes we let God be God, and sometimes we try to be our God. and we just consider him, sort of a token God. But he answers the prayers of those who truly let him remain on the throne of their hearts and be God. And he protects those who love him. I loved that. Now, Psalm 88 to 89. I want to give you some background and teaching into this one. This one, Psalm 88, is written by a new figure we've not read about or studied about before. It says it's by Heman, Heman. So I want to tell you a little bit about him. He was Samuel, the prophet Samuel's grandson. He is called a wise man in 1 Kings 4:31. He was a singer. He was one of the temple musicians that David put in charge. Remember, it was very important to David at the tabernacle to have worship and praise and singing, and he actually appointed singers and people who played musical instruments to be part of the temple priests. Now, all of these people were Levites, and he was a Levite. He actually played the cymbals, so he was a worship leader. Consider that. And he wrote psalms, which we have learned is their music. So he was a worship leader and a songwriter. Asaph, Asaph, we've talked about him before. Vonda, you mentioned him in one of your earlier posts because he has written a number of psalms. He was Herman's first assistant. So that kind of gives you the hierarchy. This Herman, or Heman, I guess it is, Heman, not Herman, Heman, was a pretty important worship leader. And Ethan, we're going to see a psalm in just a minute, 89, that he wrote. He was also in this group of musicians, and he was Heman's second assistant. So that's kind of how that worked. We see in Psalm 88 that it is the saddest psalm of all of them. It actually has a name, an elegy, E-L-E-G-Y. That just means it's a sad musical composition. It could be a funeral lament, and it's a poem expressing grave sorrow. It doesn't say what the sad occasion is, so we're not really sure. It just implies that the psalmist is in desperation. It does say, "My God, I cry out to you" at the beginning, so we know he has a relationship with God. But it is so sad that when you read it, you're like, well, where's the end? Give me the end. Does this person get out of this situation? It's like a miniseries that you've been watching on TV, and you expect the season finale. Maybe there's going to be some closure, and there's no closure, and you don't know how it ends. That kind of was how, when I read the psalm, how it made me feel. This person feels that God has left him for dead. He's been abandoned by people, and it's very hurtful to have people reject you and abandon you and just kind of just blow you off. And this person feels left out, forgotten, thinks that God must be angry with him. He says, "I'm in trouble," and notice that he cries a lot. So he's comparing what it's like to be forgotten when he's alive, when we're living and we feel forgotten by people. He's comparing that with somebody who's died and gone to Sheol. Sheol was a Old Testament concept. Hebrews understood it very, very well to be a place of sleep where your soul died. Well, when you died, your soul went there, and it was just a place of sleep. And he says that, in Sheol, there's no praise. Everyone's sleeping. There's no wondrous acts of God to see. You're forgotten by the people. You're forgotten by God. He does nothing for you anymore. You're just kind of in this state. And he mentioned in the psalm that there must have been some sickness in his life. Did you pick up on that? That his whole life had scares of death. So maybe he was kind of going from one situation to another in sickness, and he thought he got better, and then he got worse, and he thought he got better, and he got worse. And so, I keep reading this trying to find a conclusion. There is a conclusion, there's just no resolution. And here it is. His hope is in God alone. And he gives 3 reasons for his hope. Number 1, he stays close to God day and night. Through this trial, this is a good way to address the trial. Staying close to God day and night. Number 2, he keeps praying. He's persistent in prayer. Number 3, he believes that God is listening and, of course, will act in the right time. Now, we can relate to this psalm in some common situations. I was trying to think, well, what common situations do we have where we could read this psalm and see that someone else can understand what we're going through? Well, job loss would be one, the death of a loved one. So many people's homes are being foreclosed. I think that would be a real terrible situation. If you find yourself, you've made a mistake and you find yourself having to go to prison, that certainly would be a bad one. Sickness is certainly a scary time. And so just trying to give you some situations that you can kind of relate to as you read this. Now, Psalm 89 is a messianic psalm. It's written by Ethan, who is the second assistant to Heman. It's pretty long, isn't it? It's pretty long. Let me break it down for you and it'll make a little bit more sense. It was probably written by Ethan after Nathan spoke to David about his kingdom enduring forever. There were really 2 times that we read before, 2 primary times where Nathan came to David and told him something important. Let's just recap. The first time Nathan was a prophet, right? And the first time he went to David was about a year, maybe a year and a half after he committed that sin with Bathsheba, fathered a child, and killed the husband to try to get away with it. Nathan confronted him. David confessed. He said, oh, what a relief now that I've confessed. I don't have to hide this thing anymore. And Nathan said there would be judgment on the sin. That child died, but they ended up, the 2 of them, Bathsheba and David, having another child, which was Solomon, which we will read about in the future, and he ends up succeeding David to the throne. We haven't read about that yet, but it's coming. The second time Nathan talks to David, this really important message is that he's promising him that his kingdom will never end and that he will have a dynasty that goes on forever. That time is what this psalm is all about. So this is where we're going to learn a little bit more about the Israelites' understanding of their coming Messiah. The key words in Psalm 89 are loving kindness and faithfulness. They each appear 7 times in this psalm. The key verse is from 34 and 36, where it says, God is speaking and he is saying, I will not break this covenant that I am making with you, David. Your dynasty will go on forever. And this is the rest of the story that Nathan was telling David. God is ratifying a covenant. The covenant that he made earlier with Israel. Remember the Mosaic covenant? If you do this, Israel, I'll bless you. If you don't do this, Israel, I'll curse you. God is changing everything in the Davidic covenant in saying, it's not going to be so dependent on your behavior anymore. I'm going to do this regardless of how you act. I, God, am going to make sure that your dynasty lasts forever. And of course, he was talking about the coming king. Jesus is a descendant, a direct descendant of David, and is king. King of the Jews, king of our hearts, but that's the dynasty that he's talking about. In verse 19 to 37, reread that section thinking about this coming kingdom, the coming kingdom of Jesus where he will be king. You know, we anticipate a 1,000-year reign in the future where Jesus is going to come back. We anticipate him, and we call it the second coming, that he will come back, he will establish a 1,000-year reign, and he'll actually be king. King of all of the kings in the whole world. In 19 to 37, we see talk about this dynasty that won't end, which means an eternal dynasty. Cannot be thwarted by men's behavior. And the covenant is based now on God, not on the behavior of the people. In verse 38 to 45, it says, this is a very interesting section here. It talks about a time in history that is coming where it will look like the dynasty just isn't going to happen. Things have fallen apart. There's no king on the throne. It doesn't look good. I don't know if God's really going to do this or not. And I wonder, are we there now? I think we are there now in history. There's no king in Israel. It looks like Israel is surrounded by enemies, and it looks like the kingdom's been abolished. I believe that is prophecy that we're seeing today in our time. But also in this section, verse 38 to 45, it says this: perception will not last forever. God's oath will compel his intervention, and he will send Jesus back, and Jesus will come again, and he will establish his kingdom here on earth. Israel, their enemies are God's enemies, and there will come a time where they will be defeated. Even though today in our history, the enemies of Israel mock their belief that their king, Israel's king, will rule the earth, it still doesn't change the fact that that's what prophecy, that's what the Bible tells us will happen. And we are sitting in history today in anticipation and waiting for that day. And we can certainly pray that the Lord would make that come quickly. And we can certainly pray, as we should, for Jesus' return, for his second coming. So that is the conclusion of today's lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're seeing and learning a lot from the Psalms. I know I have really enjoyed it. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about a little bit more about praise, but we're going to get deeper into a sacrifice of praise. And how do we do that? What does that look like? Tomorrow's lesson is entitled, What God Wants. So I encourage you to go ahead and read ahead tomorrow before you watch the video, and we're gonna look at what God really wants and how do we live a sacrifice of praise. It's a lesson you won't want to miss. Blessings, everyone. Can't wait to see you tomorrow.